Hey guys, so Crystal and I are right now in the midst of driving to New York. We're going to see my mom. I'm being a good son, but of course, massive, major breaking news had to come out this morning. So I woke up this morning and Crystal immediately informs me that there's another war going on. War just broke out. So what happened is Hamas did an invasion of Israel. It's land, air, and sea. We'll get to specifics on that in a second, what we mean by that. And then we're already at the point now where Israel has retaliated. So Crystal, give everybody, everything that you know to this point.
Yeah, so it looks like there were thousands of rockets, something like 2,000 to 5,000 rockets fired into Israel by Hamas operating out of the Gaza Strip, the occupied Gaza Strip. And we also had armed militants taking over towns in southern Israel. We also had, you mentioned the air and the sea. There are videos of people coming in on literal hang gliders and
Just for 1 second.
Yeah.
That's the air attack, just real
hang gliders.
So when I said they were attacking by air, you probably thought like fighter jets or something. No, dudes were literally with hang gliders, like hang gliding into Israel to launch attacks.
Yeah,
anyway,
and I saw one picture of some kind of boat. So that's, and I also actually did, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Kyle, there were apparently also, what do they call them, denial of service attacks, like web hacking
against the
attacks against Israelis
government
as well.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
in any case, this is being called the most aggressive, most sophisticated attack on Israel in 50 years. It came almost exactly on the 50-year anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, which looms very large in the Israeli sort of like national identity, where a coalition of Arab states was able to attack them with some success. They were able to beat that back, but it is part of what led to the fears that justified this massive security state, massive surveillance state, and the apartheid conditions, which have, of course, been imposed on Gaza and the West Bank.
Give me casualties.
So as of now,
which it's 3:19 on Saturday.
The latest
PM
numbers
Eastern time.
I've seen are about 200 Palestinians who've been killed and about 100 Israelis who've been killed, about 1,600 Israelis who've been injured. Hamas was directly targeting, it appears, civilians, and they were taking hostages. There's reports of somewhere around 50 hostages, we don't really know the numbers at this point, that were intentionally rounded up and taken, both to use as a point of leverage. Hostages, very emotional issue within Israel, and also to complicate the Israeli government response. Netanyahu immediately responded by saying, we are at war, and saying, we were going to exact a horrific price or something like that on the enemy. We've already seen that retaliation begin. One of the first reported acts was to completely blow up and raze an entire apartment building. So I imagine there were quite a number of civilian casualties there. President Biden just gave a statement recently, which was very short and says exactly what you would expect him to say. We're with Israel 100% and they have a right to defend themselves. So that's kind of where we are right now. There's a lot of domestic backstory here. Netanyahu is leading the most right-wing government in Israeli history. There's been escalating Israeli government and Jewish settler attacks on Palestinians. His credibility has been dramatically undermined both by corruption charges he's faced, but more recently, and I think more relevant to this situation, this attack on the independent judiciary, which has sparked mass protests across the entire state of Israel. And, this really strikes at his sort of entire argument for his government, which is like, yeah, we're a bunch of hawkish right-wing psychos, but we'll keep you safe and we'll keep you secure. And obviously, there is no real security. This is not to justify any sort of attacks on civilians, but you're never going to have real peace and security so long as you have people effectively locked up in a cage for decades on end.
Yeah, so let's state what I think are the most obvious things in the world. Obvious thing number one, any and all attacks on civilians are always wrong, no matter who does it. In fact, that's the definition of terrorism when you're doing political or religious violence against innocent civilians. And so in no way, shape, or form should anybody be justifying or rationalizing those things. It's very sloppy, generalized thinking to just bring up like sides, like, oh, like what side are you on?
Right, like these are the good guys and these are the bad guys, so I support whatever they do no matter what it is.
Yeah, so 100% condemnation of Hamas targeting civilians in any way, shape, or form. Again, if people whoever can't admit that is an idiot in my opinion. That's one big piece of it. The other big piece of it is the other thing that I think is incredibly obvious, which is, let's not pretend, as many people are, by the way, that this is quote-unquote unprovoked.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, nobody could have seen this coming, and why are they actually doing it? You'll see all sorts of theories. Well, they're just savages. They're just barbarians. Or the, justification that many people have given when you go back a decade or so is like, oh, it's their religion. It's their religion and their culture that makes them like this, and they don't value life, and, and that's why they're doing it. And the fact of the matter is, no, of course, at the core of it is exactly what you think it is. It's the endless occupation and apartheid and subjugation, and the ultra-Orthodox settlers have not exactly been gentle or hiding their aspirations here as to what they want to happen. It's a slow motion ethnic cleansing. Everybody knows that. The entire international community knows that. And basically any expert would tell you, at some point something like this is going to happen unless you address the concerns and the needs and the human rights of Palestinians. So you have to keep both of those things in your mind at the same time. On the one hand, 100% condemn any actions against civilians on both sides, by the way, because you're now going to see it's going to be ramped up colossally. But then the other thing is, yes, at the core of this is you're not addressing the main conditions that then led to this. That's not to justify it. That's not to rationalize it. Like I said, hurting civilians is always 100% wrong, but that is at the core of what leads to this. I like to think of it as like a law of nature, because it is a law of nature. If you are this repressive and oppressive, and you subjugate this many people, and you take away their human rights, and they're living in an open-air prison for this long, yes, this is going to be the reaction, whatever you think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also worth recalling that, Palestinians have also marshaled mass, non-violent protests.
And nobody cares. Nobody cares. Media doesn't cover it.
And Israel targeted journalists and civilians and murdered them, according to Amnesty International, a lot of other human rights organizations.
They have it literally on tape.
In response.
Yes.
So, it's... Anyway, there's a lot to be said about this, and the fallout from it is absolutely going to be massive. The planning was certainly months in the making. Very likely Iran was involved. Israel certainly thinks Iran was involved, so it could be a response there.
That would be devastating, by the way. If Israel and Iran get into a hot war,
and that
would be a huge deal.
Very much on the table, I would say. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say, so back in 2014, there was something called Operation Protective Edge, where Israel killed at least 1,300 civilians in Gaza, and over 500 of them were children. And the numbers that we learned from the UN at the time is that anywhere from 63% to 80% of the people who were killed in Gaza overall were civilians. And so what you see in these situations, and it happens time and time and time again, is that Hamas takes these shitty little, slapped together bottle rockets that they have, and these things are not accurate, they're not high level, they're not military grade, and they launch all these things into Israel, and usually the numbers are like, a dozen Israelis killed and a couple hundred who are injured. This time it's a little more than that, as we already described. But then the reaction inevitably is always, all right, open the gates of hell on them. And it's like, send out the fighter jets, bomb their water infrastructure, their apartment buildings, everything you could think of. That's why it's, Gaza is commonly referred to as an open-air prison. And it was the UN or Amnesty International who did a report who said this place is going to be uninhabitable in a short time frame. And so the thing that's scary to me is this. I think best case scenario now, after what we're seeing, is you're going to have another Operation Protective Edge. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, they bomb Gaza to smithereens and basically bomb it off the map. You know what I'm
worst
saying?
Case scenario is a hot war with Iran, which is also on the table,
yeah.
I think. The one other geopolitical aspect of this is the U.S. was very involved in trying to broker this deal with Saudi Arabia to try to normalize relations with Israel. The Palestinians were very opposed to this, and Saudi Arabia has already put out a statement very sympathetic to Hamas and Palestinians. So have to think that is off the table at this point.
Definitely.
So, you know, and all the politicians are putting out their statements that are very, very cookie cutter, very Israel has a right to defend themselves, as if that's ever in doubt, but never stated that Palestinians also have a right to defend themselves. Again, the tactics here, targeting civilians, completely immoral, war crimes, unacceptable.
Terrorism, of course, yeah.
Not condoning that whatsoever, but there's so little context of what leads to this, and just so little concern over all of these many years for Palestinian civilians and Palestinian life.
And I'll tell you why. It's because it's part of the system. It's baked into the system. And so it's a slow motion ethnic cleansing is what it is.
Yeah.
And so when it's systemic violence, it's just like, what do you mean? That's just how it is. That's just how the world is. It's just like, that's just nature.
Right.
You know? But, you know, it's not. And it's a horrendous situation all around. And I mean, look, from a U.S. perspective, what do you do from now moving forward? We know what they're going to do. What they're going to do is, you know, all the money and weapons that we're sending to Ukraine, they're going to be like, okay, now do it right back to Israel. We already give them a tremendous amount of money and weapons, but it'll be like ramp that up massively. And everybody releases their statements, you know, Israel has a right to defend themselves, etc., Hamas terrorists, etc. But like, what should be done is a real serious approach to trying to bring about peace and stability and end the cycle of violence. And that would include the U.S. being a neutral arbiter, not the U.S. being obviously and clearly biased on the side of Israel, the most brazen way imaginable, right? If you look at the votes of the UN, and usually it's the United States who's vetoing any criticism of Israel whatsoever, never mind actually like trying to enforce international law, which everybody agrees Israel's in direct contravention of international law. But like, we would need to be a neutral arbiter for real and get to some sort of a situation where you end the occupation. Two-state solution is already out the window, as every, you know, expert will tell you on the issue.
Yeah.
It's a one-state democratic solution where everybody has equal rights and an equal vote and an equal say. But unfortunately, we're so far away from that now, and it's like I have no hope that we're ever going to move towards a situation where there is peace in the region and there is
real justice.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's been pissing me off, and what people are saying too. I'm seeing all these people are like, oh, well, this just, you know, sets them backwards in terms of any sort of two-state solution. I'm like, what fantasy land are you living in that there was a real possibility of a two-state solution at this point? I mean, in Israel, in the U.S., there's still this fiction of, oh, we're pushing towards a two-state solution. In Israel, they've abandoned. In Israel, they've basically abandoned the fiction. I mean, Netanyahu doesn't even, you know, flirt with this delusion at this point domestically, and you know, his government, like I said, their whole justification for existence is we are the people who will keep you safe. All of our fanaticism, you know, this dude in the cabinet who's like outwardly, expressly genocidal towards Palestinians, it's all justified because we will keep you safe. And obviously there is a deep flaw at the core of that, which is you cannot lock people in a cage, keep them in an open air prison, and think that there is going to be peace and safety and security. It will never happen as long as these grave injustices continue, and to me that's just the bottom line.
Yeah, and well, again, this being recorded, now it's 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, and I'll try to keep you guys updated on the numbers and stuff. We're just giving you what we have as of this moment, but I fully expect the casualty numbers, the injury numbers to go up on both sides, and I think with an even heavier emphasis on the Palestinian side, because now they feel like whatever brakes were in the car to begin with, which wasn't many, now they're going to cut those brakes completely.
Yeah.
It's going to be all systems go.
Yeah, absolutely.